taking complexity and distilling it to simplicity. So once you take that complex, because a lot of people thrive on complexity. They say, if I can deal with complex things, then that shows how intelligent I am. My challenge to people like that is, if you are really intelligent, you will be able to take a complex thing and make it simple.
Welcome to another episode of peopleHum interview series. I'm your host Neha Murthy, and let's begin with a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Coding Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest. Alan Hosking is an expert in preparing people and companies for the future of work. He is an award-winning publisher of HR Future magazine and a professional speaker. He is a teacher of agile and ethical leadership, new generation leadership, managing multiple generations in the workplace, leadership skills for millennials, and age management 50s plus high achievers. He was named by DisruptedDaily.com as one of the top 25 future of work influencers to follow on Twitter. We're extremely happy and honored to have him on our interview series today. Welcome, Alan. We're excited to have you with us today.
I'm thrilled to be with you. Looking forward to our chat.
Sure. So the first question I had for you, Alan, was you've had an exciting journey throughout your career. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I can indeed. Right at the beginning, when I was about to start university, deciding on what course to follow, I did a series of tests, and the psychologist at the time said to me after all the test results came out, he said, "You're good with 2 things. You're good with people and you have a good language skills." So he said, "Why don't you go and be an English teacher?" So I did, in fact, go and do a degree in English and psychology and a postgrad diploma in didactics, and then did teach for a couple of years and thoroughly enjoyed it. After that, I found that I was growing the pupil students, but I wasn't growing myself. And so I started looking around and managed to secure a job at one of the major banks in South Africa, Standard Bank, and that was in training because that's what teachers can do. And then while I was at Standard, I wrote a book for first-time dads called What Nobody Tells a New Father. And when that came out, they said, "Oh, we didn't know you could write. Won't you help us with this? Won't you help us with that?" I then moved into a communications role. After that, I essentially was a publisher at the bank and felt the entrepreneurial urge to move on and start my own business, which I then did, and published contract publishing on behalf of a number of large companies. And then in 2001, decided to launch HR Future. And I sensed that there was a need for a future focus. And that was long before anybody else was talking about the future. Today, everybody's an expert on the future. But all those years ago, almost 2 decades now, we launched HR Future. And we've been having fun with it ever since. It's been a wonderful journey for me in that it's given me a platform to do all sorts of other things. I'm certainly not a one-trick pony, so I would be very bored just doing one thing. So I'm able to use my teaching skills as well. I do a lot of training in terms of leadership development. I engage with millennials in terms of helping them acquire good management skills. I do age management coaching for senior executives, typically 50s plus, to help them manage their age, not as a liability, but as an asset, to turn it from a liability to into asset. And so that's in a nutshell the type of work that we do through HR Future, preparing HR directors, HR professionals, and team leaders for the future.
Wow, that's wonderful. Like you kind of had a taste of everything that you've loved, right?
Indeed. And as I look back over all those years, that psychologist was absolutely right. In language and people, those are my things.
Absolutely. So, according to you, what defines ethical leadership and how can we become responsible for it?
Good question. Now, ethical leaders, as far as I'm concerned, one has to take a step back before that, because you have to ask yourself, what is an ethical person? Because unethical people become unethical leaders, and ethical people become ethical leaders. So we then ask ourselves, where do we learn our ethics? And the sad thing is, we don't learn ethics at business school. That's just too late. We learn our ethics from young when we're growing up. And we have parents or caregivers, those who are playing an influential role in our lives, influencing us. If we've got the right influence, we'll grow up to be ethical. For example, little child who takes something that doesn't belong to them. If they have a parent that says, no, 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 we don't take things that don't belong to us, that doesn't belong to you, so put it back, because they learn ethics from that point of view. Ethics has been burnt very, very deeply on my heart, because I had a highly ethical father who taught me that honesty wasn't the best policy, it's the only policy. He said, if you've got other policies, then you're not quite as honest. So that was drummed into me, it was written on my heart, and he lived it very much as an example. And I think that's very much part of ethical leadership. You've got to walk that talk. You can't just say, well, do as I say. It's got to be do as I do. And that's where you build tremendous influence, when you're able to model the behavior.
Yeah, that's so true. And I completely agree. Like, honesty is not just the only policy. Like, it,
Indeed.
it's wonderful. So, yeah, like you've been mentoring young leaders, right? So, mentoring young leaders takes a change in mindset. So, what are some insights from your experience in terms of how to deal with mentoring young leaders?
When you are engaging with young people, you've got to move into their world, and you've got to, and that's where empathy comes in. It's so important, because you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and walk alongside them. So it's not about, in the old days, the old model of mentoring was, I, who am old and wise, will tell you who are young and stupid everything. And it doesn't work like that today. I speak in terms of a co-mentoring model. So co-mentoring, some people call it reverse mentoring. I'm not too fond of that term, because reversing means going backwards. But co-mentoring is where we mentor one another. So it's a case of, I, who am older than you, will teach you things that I've learned along the way, but I want you to teach me certain things that you know. So things about technology, etc., that I might not know. I was sharing this story with an HR director a little while back, and he looked at me with a puzzled look on his face, and he said, that would help me, because I don't even know how to twit. So, and then I explained to him that it's not twit, you have to tweet. Oh, he says, oh, okay. And it's little things like that, that as you mentor young people and you move into their world, they become comfortable with learning from you. And so you're able to walk alongside them, and you become like a tour guide, where a tour guide walks with a group of people and points out things along the way. Says, did you notice that? Because such and such. And the important thing about mentoring, in fact, in terms of training, why are we training? Why are we mentoring people? It's to help change behavior. Because if they're going to just stay the same, and there's no behavioral change, what's the point? There's been no advantage. So it's about changing behavior. And information doesn't change behavior. So many people will know, for example, that smoking is bad for one's health, but it doesn't change their behavior. It's what changes behavior is not information, but insight. When one acquires an insight, and what is insight? Insight is seeing something in a way that you've never seen it before, or seeing something that you haven't seen before. And when you stop and you say, okay, I haven't seen that before. I haven't seen it like that before. I didn't realize that. And you acquire that moment of insight, you actually make all the changes inside yourself. And you know what? those changes are usually permanent, because now you're seeing things differently. You live in a different way. And no one has to give you a refresher course. No one has to come back and say to you, well, now you know you need to work on these things again, because that person has acquired an insight, a moment of enlightenment, and they then live in a certain way. And so that's what mentoring is, to me, is all about, is helping people to acquire insights rather than just imparting information to them.
Absolutely. We need to even hear what others say, right? Like we need to put ourselves in their shoes and understand what they're feeling. And that is when we can have a blend of both and give a productive output.
Well, what you're talking about there, you're saying hearing what others say, that is so important, listening, because we don't know really how to listen. And we need to listen with our whole body. You need to listen with your eyes as much as you listen with your ears. You need to take in the person's behavior, their body language. You need to listen to not only the words that they're saying, but the hidden text, the between the lines text. So take, for example, a couple who the wife might say to the husband, you never tell me that you love me anymore. Now, if he's not listened to what she's really said, he will react with it. Typically, will say, "But you know, I love you. I'm very busy. I'm working on my career." And if he'd listened to what she'd really said, when she said, "You never tell me you love me," what she really was probably saying was, "I don't feel loved anymore." And if he were to hear that, then he would respond very differently. He would say, "Oh, you know, my darling, you're right. I'm sorry. I have been neglecting you or have been distracted, and I shouldn't be like that. I'm sorry. I apologize, and I'm going to make a point of really spending a little bit more time with you." Then she will feel heard. So hearing is such an important part of influencing people, because when we as human beings, one of our deepest needs, whether we're right at the top of the tree or right at the bottom, we all have an incredible need to feel heard. And very often when we don't feel heard, people become more frustrated until it builds up, and then it becomes quite destructive. And we have all sorts of protests and violence and things like that happening.
Absolutely. And one more thing I would want to say is the way you said change behavior. Like you need to not just go get the information, but you have to like accept the behavior. That is something, a key takeaway from what you said. And thank you so much for that.
Only a pleasure.
Yeah. So, in an organization with workers of multiple generations, so how can we have a unifying work culture, especially during these times of remote working?
Again, I draw on my work with in parenting, with my parenting book. And I came to realize that we, generally speaking, we grow up in different sized shapes and sized families. The mom, pop, and two children is not necessarily what everybody has. There are single parent families, there are children that grow up without parents, there are blended families, yours, mine, and ours. But generally speaking, we actually grow up in a multi-generational environment, because you've got older people, you've got younger people, and we don't realize that the principles that are involved there. For example, you take in a family, the youngest person in the family has just as much access to the oldest person in the family as anybody else. Now, you translate that into the workplace, and that's not the case. The youngest, most junior person in the company doesn't necessarily have access to the top people. And when we talk about flat structures, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about collapsing all those layers so that people at the bottom are just as accessible, vice versa. And it's as we start applying the principle of relationships, because that's what families join families together. That's what binds a family together. It's the relationships. And as we build relationships in the workplace that are based on trust, based on mutual respect and common understandings and common purpose, because a family generally also, a healthy family has a common purpose. They want to work together to succeed. As we start applying those principles in the workplace, instead of the command and control, then we find that the generations actually work very well together, because younger people, most of them do have older parents. And so when there's an older person in the workplace that's able to relate to them, they can then relate as, you know, I've got parents that age. The older people say, well, I've got children that age. So they can relate in different ways. And it's not about being condescending. It's just about developing a relationship, because one of the, we're talking about influence, one of the biggest determinants of influence is relationship. The quality of the relationship determines the level of influence you have in someone's life. That is why when people do sales calls, cold calling is such a tough game, because they have no relationship with the person on the other side. But when you phone someone up that you know very well and they say, oh, hello, it's so nice to hear your voice again. And you say, well, you know, we've just brought out this new product. I wondered if I could pop around and show you. Yes, sure, come around. Why? Because you have a relationship. And it's about building relationships in the workplace. As we do that, the generational differences, they're not as important anymore, because we're connecting in a different way.
Absolutely, that is so insightful. I mean, like around 70% of the time we spend in office working, and if we don't make that relationship, then it's just going to be a job, and it gets redundant over day. You need to make relationships to keep it going. You need to accept it as a family.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you so much. So before just wrapping up this interview, I would love to ask, like, do you have any other sound bites to leave with our audience for?
I think that the essence of what I've been talking about could be summed up in the importance of taking complexity, because we live in an increasingly complex world, taking complexity and distilling it to simplicity. So once you take that complex, because a lot of people thrive on complexity. They say, you know, if I can deal with complex things, then that shows how intelligent I am. My challenge to people like that is, if you are really intelligent, you will be able to take a complex thing and make it simple. And I think that's the important thing today in life. As we're dealing with complexity, we must continually challenge ourselves and say, how can we simplify this? What is the essence of it? What are the simple 3 things we need to do that are going to get us through this? And things like relationship, things like insight, those are simple things, not necessarily easy. They're simple, but they're so profound, and they have such a powerful effect on people.
Wow, that's wonderful, Alan. It was wonderful connecting with you. It was an enriching experience for me. There are so many fresh new concepts that you brought in, and it was amazing. And it's going to be the same for our audience as well.
Oh, thank you very much. That's so kind of you. Good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much. Yeah.
Okay then. Cheerio.